Hello, my name is Addy Lipson. I am a student at Touro University Worldwide. This presentation is called Biting the Hand. We are going to be talking about the FAIR Act and how it is a great way for workers to continue to build collective power. So the FAIR Act looks to put an end to forced arbitration. Forced arbitration is a term in contracts that states if there is a grievance, the signer of that contract waives their rights to litigation and instead must compulsory have arbitration with the other person of that grievance, the person that put together the contract. What this means is that if it's a niche industry, there are only going to be so many arbitrators that have the skills and know-all to have domain over those disputes. So companies end up being repeat customers of similar arbitrators, and it raises questions about the ethics and the transparency of the arbitrator. So companies are doing this because if people don't sign away their rights to litigation, if there are enough people that have the same issue, they can bring a class action suit against the company. Companies don't want that. Companies want lower settlements, and in arbitration, settlements are habitually lower, and there's a higher percentage of arbitrators siding with the employer rather than siding with the employee. What's interesting about this is that this is a completely populist issue. People on both sides of the aisle agree that waiving away your rights to participating in the American court system is, quite frankly, un-American. To further build on this, let's talk about where we came from. So after the Civil War, we had all this new technology, all of this manpower, and a new united country with a united banking system. Wars have long brought economic spurs, but after the Civil War, we have the Industrial Revolution. In the early 1850s, we became a superpower because we shifted from farms to factories. What's interesting about factories is that they're able to make everything. You put a lot of people in one building with some raw materials, and they're able to put out any product. Everything that we have, everything in your house, your life, has been made by a worker. So, what this all bubbles up to is a strong economy. When workers have rights and they have good funding and they have all of their needs provided for them, all that extra money goes to continuing to fund the local economy. So this has bubbled up into a few things that are codified into law, like the National Labor Relations Act or the Wagner Act, which we will be talking about later. And we have different union groups like the AFL-CIO that represent workers across several industries and have several subunions. And businesses should care about these workers and how happy they are because EBITDA and payroll expenses are the largest expense that a company will face because there's only so much overhead expense that one employee can produce. So moving before the Civil War, there were craft unions. These were collections of woodworkers and stonemasons that would be contacted when a specific job needs to be done. Very similar to how electrical unions and plumbers unions work today. After the Civil War, there was a shift in the American economy from a farming economy to a manufacturing economy. Wars have long brought economic spurs, and this one resulted in the Industrial Revolution. Not long after the Industrial Revolution started, the Noble Order of the Knights of Labor gathered people together that were in these factories and started discussing what the working conditions and the wages were like in those factories. This was the first time that workers en masse have had built collective power. What this led to was railway workers seeing how those manufacturing plants that they're taking materials between started to organize their workplaces. The Railway Labor Act is the result of years of railway organizing that led to the first time in codified law a list of rights and protections for workers. Now, this started to bubble up, and all of these different industries, like mining, had their own version of the Railway Labor Act. In 1935, the Wagner Act was written. The Wagner Act, also known as the National Labor Relations Act, codified in law a list of protections that workers have, codified the 40-hour workday. A lot of things that each of these individual things had were brought under one piece of legislation that now all of these other tiny pieces of legislation refer to. This was part of Eisenhower's New Deal. More people power started to be made when two of the largest unions, the AFL and the CIO, merged in 1955. This resulted in the largest union the world has ever seen across all industries, across the entire United States. Now, as more workers got more and more access to the workplace, thanks to the protections they had been given, they started to realize that not all workers are treated the same. We wanted to give people power to specific protected classes that are codified under the Civil Rights Act. We wanted to give people equal pay for equal work, thus the Equal Pay Act. And Executive Order 10988 was written by President Kennedy to give government employees the rights to do the same organizing that their private sector counterparts have had. In 1970, Nixon created the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which is administered by OSHA. What this does is give stiff fines for employers that are practicing the same unsafe practices that the Knights of Labor identified at the start of the Industrial Revolution. In the 80s, when workers in factories started to get laid off en masse, we got the WARN Act. There were a lot of companies that saw Eastern Asia, especially South Korea, as a cheap manufacturing hub, and that's when jobs started to go offshores. Factories started to shutter, affecting thousands of workers at a time. The WARN Act makes sure that employers give enough heads up and specific resources to laid off employees when there's massive layoffs like that. And then, closing off in this brief list, is the ADA, and that's the picture you see on the right. The ADA, or American with Disabilities Act, gave specific rights and protections to workers, as well as making sure that businesses had different physical accommodations like wheelchair ramps, etc. These rights were granted because of many actions of workers through hundreds of years. In 1886, thousands of workers gathered in downtown Chicago in support of the 888, which is 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, and 8 hours of one's will. They were trying to give birth to the weekend. The state responded by dispatching National Guard troops and opening fire against the workers. What's unique about this situation is that while National Guard troops have been called in to workers' conflicts before, this was the first time that workers have been killed by the state regardless of industry or employer. It was the first time that the state took an action of violence against collective workers, and it resulted in the 40-hour work week later down the line and the weekend. In 1892, toward the end of the 1800s, the economic spur from going into the Industrial Revolution started to flatten, and we entered an economic depression. Workers were advocating for higher wages across industries and for cheaper situations for living. The Homestead Strike was a strike where a coal plant locked out unionized workers because they were asking for better conditions. The unionized workers protested outside of the plant and were gunned down by National Guardsmen. Going forward, in 1894, for the same economic plight reasons, Eugene Debs, the head of the American Railway Union, organized a protest against the Pullman Streetcar Company. This was due in part to racial disparities, like black workers having to pay exorbitant fines to live on the train, which was common in that industry, so much so that they were making less than 10% of their white counterparts. There was a very large demonstration in Chicago again that had over 250,000 workers. When things started to get awry, it resulted in a mob that did $80 million of economic damage. From there, the government decided to make an injunction and hold the Pullman Car Company accountable. In 1911, we have the fires at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. In New York, there was a shirt manufacturing plant that for some reason caught on fire, and the exit doors to that plant opened inward instead of outward, and all of those workers died. Things like this is what led to the creation of OSHA. And then 1914, this is still before the Roaring Twenties, we have the Colorado Labor Wars, where once again, workers were trying to get better economic conditions, and management said no. This resulted in a few months of workers bombing the offices of management in order to capitulate them into giving better working conditions. This resulted in a lot of great laws under the mining industry, similar to the Railway Labor Act. The previous slide talked a lot about the history and the reasons workers have pooled their resources together to have collective power and collective action. Why not consumers? Consumers are also workers. Consumers purchase the products from across the counter from a worker. The product has been made by countless workers. They were able to buy that product from the work they did, or at least the withheld capital from someone else working. Everyone is a worker, therefore everyone has specific reasons to advocate for collective workers' rights. Not everybody consumes the same products. Another reason why workers should have these protections is because of the national laws that codify these protections that forced arbitration strips them of. Our entire history and economy is based off of the collectivization of workers and how that pooled resources pushed forward our economy on the global stage. And as far as culture goes, we have a long history of rooting for the underdog. Our country was founded by going against those in power and declaring independence. So another reason, jobs aren't toothpaste. You are going to stay with a job perhaps for years, and that could be because of lack of availabilities in the industry, lack of opportunities in your geographic area, different barriers to success, but you have a choice of any product that you want, especially in the digital age where you can buy anything and it could be delivered to your house within 24 hours. No one has that much free will with their job, and their different financial futures and their health and benefits depend on jobs, not the products that they buy. There are people that would be stuck at a job because of these different benefits, and that job could be exposing them to conditions that are just terrible. They are still forced to be there due to extenuating circumstances. And consumption is bulletproof. Workers are not. Consumers will consume no matter what the worker is making. That means that if demand is higher than the company is able to put out, they need to get more people in. You'll notice on the left I have a child laborer. This is one of the outcomes of the demand being larger than how the company can fulfill that demand. If there are consumers, there will be exploited workers. And those exploited workers deserve to have class action rights, and we need to put an end to forced arbitration. Thank you.